engineer John X Volaitis inside the album Bonded by Blood, the debut album from Exodus. Before we get started, is there anything new or anything coming up in the future that you wanted to talk about?
We've got a beautiful studio here in Venice called Earth Star Creation Center. And a couple blocks from the beach. It's a really wonderful place. We had the National earlier this year. And then after that, the lead singer from the National continued and did a solo album here with Booker T. Jones from Booker T. and the MGs was producing it. Then from that, Booker T. ended up staying here for a while, finishing up on his album, which corresponds to an autobiography that he just wrote. And it's also a beautiful album. So we've had sort of this nonstop succession of pretty hardcore musicians in here over the last few months.
Do you have a console there?
We do not have a console in the box.
I gotcha.
We do a lot of live full band tracking.
Do you use vintage gear? Are you mainly doing plugins or what?
Well, we've got a bit of vintage gear, but for tracking, I've kind of got just a buffet of most of my favorite mic pre's from, different consoles. We've got, some APIs, we've got some Neves, we've got the BAEs, Manleys, Focusrites, SSLs. It's a really nice collection of mic pre's. And it makes tracking here really a fun, good experience.
Are you mixing the projects there as well?
Yeah, we are. And now for mixing, it tends to be more plug-in based. Although I do have a bit of analog compression gain devices that we do. We'll run stuff through that and then back into Pro Tools.
Sure. One of the things that I couldn't tell, I clicked on some things, but I didn't see your name. It looked like, you were showing up for a whole bunch of Whitesnake stuff dating back to that 1987 record. Do you have any connection with Whitesnake?
Oh, yeah. I did a couple projects with them. It was mostly with David, on his own work. Some of it was some of his solo music, which I don't even believe has ever been released. But there was also a live video that they did, probably late 90s, which was kind of awesome. And I mixed that to them, and then we also did it in 5.1. And it's an amazing concert. Like, it was a beautifully recorded event. And it was really fun to mix him. I mean, that man still got some amazing pipes on it.
And you didn't do anything back in the 80s with him?
No, not in the 80s.
Okay.
I would have loved to have been there for those days.
Yeah, no doubt.
Absolutely.
Who were some of the other bands you worked with, like around that Exodus time? Maybe even after, just during the 80s, who were some of the people that you worked with?
Gosh, back in Exodus time. Okay, so let's see. When Exodus happened, I was living up in Northern California, and I was working at a place called Prairie Sun.
Sure. Which is still around, right?
Oh, yeah, it is totally still around. They are killing it up there. It was a great place back then. And
do you recall what kind of console they had back then?
I do. It was a Trident Series 80B, and it was in great shape. Even back then, he had tons of mics, so I'm sure that by now he must have an amazing collection. It's a guy named Muka. His name is Mark Rennick. Not only a really good engineer, but he's also an amazing bass player. And Muka and I've been working up there for a while, doing a few other metal albums with Shrapnel Records. Back in whenever. It was like 1984.
What Shrapnel Records did you work on?
Oh, shit. You know what? Honestly, I really don't remember.
Did you work on the Steeler record by any chance?
No. The one band that I do remember, and I don't think this was a Shrapnel band, but it was Keel.
Oh, wow. And that's who, he came from Steeler. That's pretty cool. Do you recall what record that was?
Oh, does Right to Rock?
Yeah, I have a connection with that album too. We had a friend that worked at A&M Records. We were out there visiting him. He was the vice president of marketing, and we were in his office, and they had just signed Keel. The two guys, Keel and the guitar player, were up there kind of cruising around the grounds there, and he called them into the office, and I got to meet them, and then they gave me a cassette of that album probably about, I don't know, 2 months before it was released.
Now, that album, I didn't really, like, somehow I ended up really bonding with those guys, but there was a different guy engineering that record. It was a guy named Mikey Davis, who was a great engineer and I think he did a lot of metal. And he was actually engineering, and I think I might have been just like assisting those guys.
So were you working with, I think Gene Simmons produced that. Were you working with him?
I never saw him anywhere at all. But I do remember Ron Keel doing the most hellacious, blood-curdling scream overdub. To this day, I'm pretty sure his blood-curdling scream out-curdled any other scream. It may have just been the circumstances, but that's the way I've always remembered it.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, there was a lot of metal through that place. There was Mike Barney from Shrapnel. He had the 7-day challenge, and if you did, or it was like a 100-hour challenge, and if you didn't get the entire metal album done like 100 hours, then the overtime came out of your pay.
Wow. Wow.
I love it. I think it was really smart on his part. It was a great challenge, because sometimes, you know, there were situations that were certainly going to get out of your control with that stuff, particularly when it came to the wormhole that can happen when you're doing vocals or lead guitars.
So with Exodus, how does that all come into play? How do you get involved with Bonded by Blood?
You know, I don't remember, but I think it might be Muka himself had hooked Mark Whitaker up with my number, and Mark Whitaker contacted me, and we got together somewhere. And at the time, I didn't know too much about, like, you know, super fast speed metal at all. It was like something completely off my radar.
Well, it was really in its infancy. I mean, it just started. It really was.
I think I remember when I was sitting down with Mark for the first time, he played me some Metallica, which I had never heard. It might have been like Ride the Lightning. I'm not sure. That's probably around when it was.
Yeah, because 84 would have been Ride the Lightning. So, yeah. And I think that's when you guys went in to record that album.
Yeah, it was just a little bit later on, yeah. So, you know, and we sat and analyzed that record, and we were like, yeah, you know, it's super cool, it's super heavy, and except let's not get like the super clicky bass drum, which I think we kind of ended up still getting. You know, it's kind of unavoidable in that genre almost.
That shit was the bomb back then.
Oh, it was totally kick-ass back then. Like, right. Back being the operative word. It's amazing how, like, certain little nuanced things like that become such a timestamp. So now, I don't remember too much, but I would go back to Prairie Sun to talk about the tracking of the drums. So now, in Prairie Sun is basically set up on a base, like farmland. So there's like horses. There was like a huge corral of horses up at the top of the driveway, and the horses are all running around. A lot of times you'd be looking out this window and you'd see, you know, some sort of animal walking by. And I think there was one point where I walked out of the control room one night, and all the horses had gotten loose. There was like a bunch of horses just walking around. I'm pretty much a total city kid, so I really did not know what to do with a bunch of horses walking around. Right. But anyway, so there's the control room, and then it's connected through tie lines to this huge room that had previously been a gigantic chicken hatchery. So it was huge and very live. Like, it was so live, like, if you hit your snare drum on Monday and you went back in Tuesday, it would probably still be ringing from the day before. It was just like the most insanely long decay. And for some, that that was the drum room. So it was so big that you could put like the room mics like 25, 30 feet away and have this sort of insane delay, which, you know, you just tuck in a little bit of that. And it certainly gave a unique ambience. I'm pretty sure we probably didn't use very much of that on this record, but you also tended to have to, because of that same decay, you really had to keep your overhead very low and close to the cymbals. Because once they would get too high, you'd start picking up some of that incredible reverberation, which could be cool, but it's totally not appropriate for a band like Exodus.
Right. So do you recall much about like how long that album took to record or any of the details?
I don't have a tremendous memory. It was definitely not something where it was that same sort of fast approach, the shrapnel approach, but it wasn't an album in 100 hours. It was probably over the course of a couple of weeks. And it was more the classic thing of where you drop the drums and bass first, and I could be remembering this wrong, where you would just drop the drums and bass first on like all the tracks, and then spend a couple of days doing all your insane guitar, rhythm lead, rhythm doubling, all that stuff. In that case, there was not much doubling because you already had two guitarists.
Right.
Those guys, it was Rick and Gary. God, those fucking guys were amazing. And I don't know, I was so impressed with them. They were just, you know, again, because it was sort of a new genre for me, it was really like, oh my God, I can't believe these guys are so fucking amazing and precise and rigid. Even though when I listen back to it now, I'm like, all right, maybe it's not like super, you know, but it's pretty awesome.
Oh, the album is classic. The unfortunate delay that kept happening to where it got released in 85 was, you know, a big deal, man. That album, to me, was as big of a debut album as, you know, Metallica's Kill 'Em All. And then, of course, Paul Baloff, you know, totally, I mean, you wouldn't consider him a singer, but completely original. And just unique. What was it like working with him?
It was like capturing a wild animal, and I loved... I really enjoyed working with him. And this is going to lead into a fun story, but he had pretty much ripped through all the vocals on that record. And there's one song, let me say, Deliver Us From Evil. Yes, Deliver Us From Evil is what it was. And on that song, there's this one line. And like, you know, we've been already doing vocals on like the whole record, and there was never a problem with like one line. And for some reason, this one line, it was just like, nope, can't get it. Nope. Like 20, 30 takes. Nope, just would not come out of his mouth. I don't know if it was a mental block or what it was, but at some point, I was like, dude, I'm going to fucking come out there, imitate your sorry ass onto the tape, and we're going to move on. And he was like, and he goes, I fucking dare you, man. I totally fucking dare you. So I came out, imitated his ass, punched in the line, and I'm singing on one line of that song.
Do you know what line that was?
Oh, yeah. It's By My Lord, My God, Master Lucifer. I feel like Paul wouldn't sign the pact, and I was like, all right, one of us is going to fucking forge your name, motherfucker. If you listen closely to that, you'll hear that it's totally a different person.
Wow.
Pretty decent job. And I was totally making fun of him, but we just kept it and moved on. You know, it could be just the blur of years, but I remember that whole project being sort of a smooth and amazing event. Oddly, I remember the band and Paul far more than I remember Mark Whitaker at all. I do not really remember him very well. It's strange. But the band really had a huge impact. Now, what I do remember is that I thought Mark did an amazing job of, like, guiding the ship through whatever waters we were in. But I just don't have any real stories about our interaction together.
Did he go on? I know he had a big, giant connection with Metallica also, and then also getting Kirk to go from Exodus into Metallica. Was there more work that he did, like production-wise? Or it also said that he helped engineer some on that record? Or mix, maybe?
I think he may have done the mix himself, or maybe with someone else, but I was not there for the mix.
Okay. And as far as anything else, do you know of any other work he's done?
I really don't. I never actually heard from him or about him again.
Bonded by Blood came out, what, like a year and a half or something after you recorded it? Was that how long it was?
It seemed like it took a while because I was living in Northern California when we did it. That studio is up in a place called Cotati. It's like near Santa Rosa, and then I was living in Sonoma County nearby. And I didn't stay up there for very long. I don't think that record came out until after I had moved back down to Los Angeles.
Oh, okay.
So it was definitely a while later. Now, on the original inner sleeve, there's a picture of me holding my baby over a barbecue grill. But I think you'd have to have, like, an original copy of the vinyl itself,
right,
which I would imagine it would be amazing, yeah.
So when the album came out, were you even aware of its impact?
You know, back then I was just a crazy freelancer, so I was just, like, constantly moving into some new musical territory or whatever, you know, so the next crazy project. But I did stay in touch with them, and I actually went and partied with them in Oakland and in San Francisco a couple of times, and I really enjoyed hanging out with them. I mean, I do remember getting kicked out of the St. Francis Hotel with Paul once. We had just been rampaging through, like, every floor, and at some point, security kind of had us surrounded, but somehow we escaped. And that's pretty much the last time I saw it.
Is there any more to that story?
There's really, it's that story, that's about as much as I actually remember. Yeah, those were some blurry nights with them.
I'm sure.
Just rampaging all over the city.
So you're talking about, like, was that after the record came out that you went up to hang with them, or was that?
Oh, yeah, definitely. It was like...
so then you definitely got to feel some of that impact. I mean, definitely in the San Francisco area, you know, Exodus were gods for that Bonded by Blood record.
Yeah, they were killing it up there. But then you mentioned the impact, and over the years, I think that record, more than any other record that I've ever worked on, that one has had the most people who are like, dude, I fucking loved that album. Like, it seems like it has been probably one of the most inspirational pieces of music that I've ever worked on. And it was so much fun and had such great energy to it. Once I kind of lost touch with them, they kind of just fell off my radar. God, I've always remembered, like, certain bits of those sessions. I really remember doing guitars with Rick and Gary and just being like, oh God, it's fucking amazing.
So as far as just working with them, everything was just super quick and precise and laid out?
That's kind of how I felt like about it. In a way, it still had that, like, super, that kind of precision was something that didn't really come up in any other kind of rock for me at that point. You know, there was still people who are like, yeah, it feels pretty cool, and you were sort of operating at that visceral level. But that precision was like, God, this is so amazing. I think my favorite, and it might be just like a weird quirk on my part, but is Piranha.
What are you saying, a story behind it or just the song?
No, just the song. I think of all of them, I feel like that one, I don't know why, somehow that's the one that always comes to mind when I think of this record.
Yeah. My favorite line when I was a kid, and even years later I used to quote it, was that slit your throat, drink your blood, who cares when others die?
You know what, this record, whenever I listen to it, I'm like, oh my God, these fucking lyrics are so awesome. Like, I just don't even, back then I was probably not likely that I would have been asking people like, what inspired you to write this? I'd probably go there now, but I don't, back then I probably wasn't. We were just so wild. God, they really, they kind of had like a super gift for it.
Did Paul have everything hammered out?
Yeah, I feel like they just like they were ready to go when they got there. It wasn't, there was no learning on the spot. I don't remember anything like that going on. These guys were like literally ready for combat when they walked in.
And so I know you said you probably wouldn't remember ways you recorded stuff, but just going back to how you recorded stuff maybe back then, like how you recorded the drums, did you have kind of a way that you did it typically?
I would always sort of start with some, sort of like a basic thing. I couldn't tell you exactly what mics. Although back then I was probably using like a D12 on the kick, but I'm pretty sure we used additional mics on the kicks for that. And there might have even been some beater mic, if I'm not mistaken, to get the additional, super click going on. If I remember correctly, I'm pretty sure that might have been the first time I had really seen anybody miking a beater. But I could be wrong about that.
And as far as recording the guitars, were you just kind of basic and slapping a 57 on a Marshall, or?
I believe those might have been 2 mic operations too, and some of that probably would have been on Mark as well, because we would sort of get nerding out a little bit, I'm sure. But it was probably a 57 and a something else.
Uh-huh.
I would guess it would be something like that. Maybe even an 87, a couple feet away or something like that. But having to remember that these are also 24-track analogs. So you're probably going to, if you are going to use a couple mics, you still might be summing it together. So it's just 1 track or 2-track max. Because you still, you have 2 guitarists. The drums always took up a shitload of tracks.
Right.
You spent like 12 tracks on the drums.
Right.
You have 12 left over to do everything else on. Because you have to have each tom on its own track.
Of course. I'm sure you had a room mic in there for the drums.
Oh, yeah,
right?
room mics that you pretty much aren't going to use. So you did, so sometimes you would definitely we would definitely be summing that stuff down. Even if you were using a couple mics, it might still just end up on 1 track.
And I'm assuming you're just using the pre's on the Trident, right?
Yeah, I don't think at the time. I'll bet now, I'm pretty sure now he's got like a full, huge collection of outboard stuff. But at the time, I think we were sort of using, the Trident exclusively.